Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santee, and joining me today, I'm very excited. Dale Farren is here. Dale, what do you want folks to know about you? Some of the listeners will be familiar with your name because of that NPR story about your Tennessee pre-K study a couple of years ago. But what do you want them to know?
Well, I mean, it is interesting because I've sort of hidden in the shadows of early childhood education for more than 50 years. My dissertation a long time ago was actually done in an early childhood classroom in Philadelphia, which was trying to do a sort of open classroom. And I was interested in how children behaved in that situation. And so a lot of my work has been done in classrooms or in a variety of settings, but this study, which is the only randomized control trial, we'll talk about that later, but it's netted so much attention that I've sort of moved into another phase of my life in the last part of my career.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad of that because I have enjoyed reading things that you have written since I became familiar with you in that study. So can we talk a little bit first? I know when I invited you on, I had a specific blog post from defending the early years that I thought maybe could guide the conversation. But can we start by talking about the pre-K study in Tennessee and what you learned? What we're talking about in case anyone's not familiar.
And just for a little background, and I don't know how far back we want to go, but in the mid 80s, Title I got amended so that school districts, if they wished, could put all their Title I money into a pre-K classroom, not just resource teachers as it used to be. And at that point, I actually was in North Carolina and organized a group of teachers. We called it the Preschool Initiative Network because we wanted to see, so what should this look like if it's in the public schools? When we started, like in 1988, there were 18 teachers. By the time we sort of closed it down, there were 80 teachers in the same sort of geographic area. I mean, it really grew like topsy. And so I think we moved so fast in that direction. We really didn't have a chance to say, well, what should this be? But I, at that time, was concerned about for-profit childcare centers and how they might provide less than optimal circumstances for children. And so thought then that, well, if the public schools got involved, that would assure some sort of quality. And that was the background toward my colleague and I working with the Tennessee Department of Education in partnership to mount the first randomized control trial. And it's important, we know about randomized control trials like from medicine, but we don't necessarily think about them from social science. But Tennessee was implementing in 2000, so we did this work in 2009 and 2010. They were implementing not universal pre-K, but statewide pre-K. So there was a pre-K classroom, at least one in every district. And therefore, a lot of them were oversubscribed. I mean, parents wanted to come. To be eligible, you had to meet income requirements or some other requirements like homelessness or something, some risk requirements. But so everybody who applied was equally eligible. They met the same criteria. So it was like you took not just apples to apples, but Macintoshes to Macintoshes. And we decided by flip of a coin who got in one of the seats and for whom there wasn't room. And so we have very equivalent groups that we've been following. Now we're into high school following them, but the data that we released in, the results we released in January of this year were through sixth grade. So we've been comparing almost 3,000 children through the state database, and we've got about 1,700 who went to pre-K and 1,300 who didn't get in.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the basis for our study.
Yeah. And if I remember right, the results surprised you and maybe were hard for you or not what you expected.
That's right. When we started, we worked with wonderful early childhood people in the State Department of and Tennessee's Department of Education, who were neither of whom are there any longer, but nonetheless they were, and we all had great hopes that what we were going to show was that putting pre-K in the public schools was good for children. And initially, when we looked at the entering scores in kindergarten, it did seem as though pre-K had given children an advantage. Mm-hmm. So the children who went to pre-K scored higher on school readiness type measures. By the end of kindergarten, though, the children who had not been to pre-K caught right up. Mm-hmm. And Tennessee's a rural state. And this was in the 2000s, early 2010s. So 63% of the children who didn't get into pre-K were cared for by family or neighbors. So they didn't go to any organized program. But by the end of kindergarten, there was no difference between the groups. By the end of third grade, we began to see sort of an alarming trend, which was that the children who had not been to pre-K were looking better on standardized tests. Third grade's the first time they get, statewide tests. By sixth grade, the children who had not been to pre-K were scoring significantly higher on math, reading, and science on the state test. More upsetting to me, even than that, was that the children who had been to pre-K were significantly more likely to be suspended or expelled from school. Mm. So cumulatively, they had more suspensions and expulsions than the children who had not been to pre-K. Yeah. So those were the data that got a lot of attention. And so that my surprise began in third grade. By sixth grade, I had really begun to wrestle with where was I wrong? Mm-hmm. Where were we wrong in thinking about expanding pre-K for very young children?
Yeah. So have you gotten pushback on this? Because there's a lot of people who still really think that's the answer, right? Especially for lower income families or children.
So I have a lot of publications that are in the sort of small early. I mean, they relate to early childhood. Over the years, I've published quite a lot, and once these data came out, one person said, "So when did Dale stop loving children?"
Oh no!
And another person called us pariahs. So yes, we got a lot of pushback. There's the advocates for pre-K. It's more like a religion. Mm-hmm. If you believe, then you'll know why. I mean, they really believe in it, but I think, Heather, that I think there's some creeping up of a realization that perhaps we're not doing the right thing with this, our approach to what we do with young children.
That's great news.
It is for me.
Yeah.
I was alarmed when in Biden, his first address to Congress said, young children, meaning poor children, need 2 more years of school. They don't need care.
Yeah, not daycare, school. I remember him saying it. Yes.
And I thought, no, it's just the opposite. They need care. They don't need school.
Yeah.
They'll get school soon enough.
Right. That's right. Yes, for sure. So when I first started emailing you and asking you if you could do this, come on the show, I was looking at a blog that you had written for the Defending the Early Years blog, and it's called Early Developmental Competencies, or Why PreK Does Not Have Lasting Effects. Do you have a nutshell answer to the why? I want to talk about your iceberg model too, but first, is there like a summation of?
Let's think about this. You know, when you're probably maybe too young to remember the kindergarten wars, but when kindergarten began to be expanded, and I think in Indiana it took it a while even to become full day.
It's still not required, and has not been full day for very long.
And it's not required in most states.
Yeah,
because you're not really required to go to school until you're 7, actually, right, in most states. Yeah. But it might as well be required because that's your entry into school.
Yeah.
There was a real concern that kindergarten would not operate like this nice entree into, the K-12 system, but would become like the K-12 system. Yeah. Which is exactly what happened.
Yep.
I have a colleague whose daughter just went to kindergarten, and when they went for a tour in a very good school system, when they went for a tour, she looked up at her mother and said, "Why are there all grown-up stuff in this room?"
Oh boy.
It's all a grown-up room, because it had desks. It had no centers, nothing. It's all rows of and desks. So we lost that war.
Yeah.
We'll lose the pre-K war. I think it's almost impossible to avoid the sort of push down from the older grades when you're in the public schools. And I think those experiences, especially for young, vulnerable children who come from somewhat more disorganized because of poverty and chaos in the neighborhood, more disorganized environments, for them to get into these rigid, authoritarian, demanding environments sets them up for negative feelings about school later on, which is why I think you see the expulsions and suspensions.
Yeah. I think, especially thinking about things like long group times or long, circle times, or being expected to sit very still. Those young children, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, are already learning I'm not good at school, instead of learning, being able to fully develop so that they can be good at school when it's appropriate for them to be good at school. I think it's so backwards in my mind, the way we do that. And then to say that, this one income group or these certain characteristics of families mean that they need more of what's not appropriate.
I think I've come and feel very bad about it for myself. I've come to under a late realization that this unexamined bias we have, which is that children from poor families need a different sort of preparation for school from children from more affluent families. It's a bias. It's a blaming the victim. It's saying that basically the child is not ready and therefore the child is at fault and we need to get the child ready. Right. And our idea about getting the child ready is this, as you say, this more didactic, whole group, what I think of as a training model rather than a real educational model.
Yeah. And it's the child's fault because it was the parents' fault first too. We bring those families in and lay all kinds of blame for circumstances that are often out of their control.
So I've observed in hundreds of classrooms, and I have data from hundreds more, using a very systematic behavioral count system that really tells you what's going on. It's not a rating. It really gives you a picture of what's going on. But a part of that is something we called a red flags measure, which is completed at the end of a morning-long observation or during it, and only once. It's not a rating. So if you see sarcasm, if you see negative comments about children, if there are 11 of these items, if you see a physical removal of the child, not sort of a gentle pat, but just a a jerking up and putting them down sort of stuff. Anyway, it turns out that even in Tulsa, about 50% of the teachers had one or more of these red flags. And the number of red flags that a teacher had predicted much lower scores in self-regulation for children. And we've actually now shown is actually related to lower achievement scores.
Wow.
That simple measure. But what's upsetting about that is the fact that we have classrooms where teachers are doing those behaviors. And if they're doing them when they've got an observer there.
Right. Who knows what's happening when they're not being watched?
Exactly.
Yes, I think about that when I'm in different classrooms or when I've worked in early childhood childcare programs. Yeah, that's scary and heartbreaking. So you talk about using an iceberg model. And I think that visual of, what's above the surface, what's below the surface has been used on social media for lots of different contexts, but I feel like it's really, just perfect for this conversation. You talk about the tip being those measurable readiness skills, which tend to focus on numbers and letters and compliance, essentially, right? And then, well, I'll let you talk about it. It's your model. Talk to us about your iceberg model.
It stemmed from this really, several years now of trying to wrestle with our findings and come to terms myself with what I thought was going on. First of all, it is true that children from higher resourced families enter kindergarten with better scores in things like the alphabet, recognizing letters, recognizing numbers, being able to count. That's true. And what we forget is they didn't learn those skills by sitting in didactic whole group situations. They may have mastered those skills by sitting in front of their refrigerator and moving magnetic letters around or something. But the way they learned those skills was embedded in a lot of other experiences. And what we've done with this PreK model is we've detached those skills and assumed that by just from the, so I think of those skills as the tip of the iceberg. So they're what we can see above the surface, but they actually in higher resource kids they reference much deeper and different kinds of learnings that happen to just manifest themselves in that tip of the iceberg. You can detach that tip and just teach those skills. And that does not mean you're teaching and helping children develop any of those underlying skills, such as persistence, curiosity, a deeper understanding of language, self-regulation. Those are the kinds of skills that are going to carry you further in school because there are only 26 letters of the alphabet. So once you've mastered those sort of tip of the iceberg skills, you need those deeper skills to be successful in learning other matter in later grades. And I'm pretty sure we are not developing those underlying skills in the way we're doing pre-K right now.
Right. I mean, so I'm a huge play advocate. That's where I am now. I definitely in my early career did a lot of this circle time, focus on letter, the kinds of kind of more measurable stuff. But as I've gone further, I haven't been in direct care for a couple of years, but when my last preschool that I worked in, it was essentially play based and with a well thought out intentional environment, and we read stories together. But anyway, I feel like that is hard for some people because of those outside pressures like school readiness, parents want it, kindergarten teachers, I don't want them to complain about the kids who come from my center not being ready or whatever. So I feel like it's a really difficult battle to move in the direction of those below the surface things that maybe are developed better through more play and more child-directed kinds of experiences.
I know that there are some people who are trying hard to push back on that.
Yeah.
But I was really so discouraged by the direction that California went, for example, in putting in this new pre-K program they're going to have to replace their TK program. It's just, it has all the elements of what we know don't work. I mean, they're insisting that the teachers all be licensed and certified. Heather, we have 3 very large studies that are quite rigorous and demonstrate that teacher credentials, of those kind of credentials, make no difference to quality or child outcomes. A lot of it's because I don't want to go too far afield, but we don't have good teacher preparation programs for this age child. And if you get teachers who are certified nursery school through grade 4, guess where the bulk of their training is taking place, right?
Yep.
And they know very little about the sort of wildly different kind of characteristics of 4-year-olds.
Right.
Sort of what they know and how they're making sense of the world is so idiosyncratic. I'm just think about your own children. I mean, they you take delight in the kind of craziness they're making sense, trying to make sense of the world. And so I'm not sure we've got enough strength yet in our opposition to prevent states from enacting things that we know are just not going to be good for kids.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's just so much more power coming from, whether it's the Department of Education in your state or whoever's setting those standards. Even when they try to set early childhood standards, I feel like instead of looking at each age and what's a priority and what they're already competent in and deciding here's what we should try and offer, we look at, okay, kindergarten needs this. So then 5-year-olds need letter drilling, or 4-year-olds need letter drilling. We work it from a deficit model, I guess is what I'm trying to say, instead of
and we work it from a very concrete skills basis. And it's true, the early childhood research field has not serviced the practice field very well. We haven't provided good measures of those kinds of skills. So that a program that wanted to say, hey, we're making a difference in persistence and curiosity and critical thinking can show that, because what you show is how many letters your children
I think the other side of it too is, at least in many states, the qualifications to work with early childhood programs or settings are so uneven. There's lots of places that don't require any formal training, formal education. So people go in and model their practice on their own school memories because they haven't been offered any other kind of alternative.
Well, see, this is if I ran the world in California, they didn't ask me to, I would have taken all that money and I would have put it into early childhood care.
Yes.
And I would have put salary supplements in for teachers. I would have made sure that all teaching staff have health benefits and retirement benefits, because that's like a golden handcuff that keeps you in your job. So I would have put supplements in particular ways to the early childhood non-existent system, so that I could stabilize it to some extent and stabilize staff and make things available and affordable to children, to parents, because programs that pay their faculty, their staff well, are affordable only to the very wealthy who do choose them.
Yeah.
So so there's so much work that needs to be done in early in care for children before school entry. It's such a mishmash of programs and anyway, there's money out there.
Yeah,
it could be integrated.
Yeah, one of the things that is disappointing to me and frustrating as a college instructor is that even NACY's professional development standards that they have for what skills people need to be able to demonstrate to prove that they're ready to go out and work with young children don't mention care at all, and play lip service, but most of it is content and sort of didactic academic kinds of focuses, and they don't even use the word care in their in their standards, and that's tricky. Oh wait, I was looking to see what I'd highlighted in here, and you already have hit a couple of them, so let me just work through here again. Can we talk about Nordic countries a little bit?
Oh,
because I'm a huge fan of Finland and Sweden, what I know of their approaches to early childhood. And if I mention that, I get, well, that's a whole different country. That's not how we do things here, but maybe we should do things that way here.
It's not how we do things here. Yeah. That's for sure. I have close colleagues in Sweden, and I spent a fair amount of time in Sweden. And so it's interesting. The last time I was there, I was actually being given an honorary degree, and so I was, I was speaking more publicly. And a reporter came up to talk to me, and she said, "Well, Sweden is not doing as well in the international comparisons now of achievement." I think OECD does in like fourth grade, or PISA things. And I mean, but they're later. They're like fourth, eighth grade, whatever. And she said, "Don't you think we should have PreK?" I said, "No." Don't you think we should make our preschool experiences more academic? I said, "No, I think you should look at your early grades to see what's happening in your first through third grade, to see, what sort of instruction is happening there that perhaps is not sufficiently deep enough to yield you the scores you want later on." But why would you assume, again, it's a blame the child thing? Why would you assume that the reason your scores on PISA, at age 13 are not as good as you want them is because the kids weren't prepared enough to come to school when they were 5 or 6?
We put so much on the shoulders of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and not enough on the shoulders of grown adults who have chosen the work.
But I had so I spent in the winter. Some couple of years ago, I was in Sweden at a separate time, and so I spent the day in a preschool classroom, in a preschool setting. And it's the winter, so they had
Sweden.
In Sweden, so they had these huge, instead of cubbies, they're like hall trees. Do you know what those are? Like, so they have sections on them. And kids come in and they take off their boots, and they take off their rubber this, and they take off their hats, and then they take off their balaclavas, and then they take off their gloves, and they have places to hang all those things. And it takes about 30 minutes to get all that stuff off.
Sure.
Go in their room, and they're in their room, and they're doing art activities and various things for about 45 minutes to an hour. And then they come back out, put all that stuff back on again. Takes another half hour. And then they go outside and they take neighborhood walks. It was just so different. So different. We observed classrooms in Memphis, Tennessee, which is not Sweden.
Right.
And half of these classes, the children were in school 7 hours a day. And half of the classrooms never went outside and never went to an indoor gym.
Oh boy.
And when we said something to the teachers about why, and they said, it's too cold. Well, let me introduce you to Sweden.
Yeah, right. I know. It's so funny to see different people's interpretation of quote unquote bad weather. We're originally from Nebraska, and we moved here when our kids were young, and to Indiana, sent our kids to the bus stop one morning, and the neighbor called and said, "There's no school today." And we were looking out the window like, what? Why? There were maybe 4 inches of snow out there or something. And I was like, all right, send them back home then, I guess.
The Swedes say, the Nordic countries, they say there's no such thing as bad weather. Yes. Only bad clothing.
Yeah. I think that's one of my first introductions to the way things are different in Nordic countries was I read a book called "There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather" by Linda McGurk something. Anyway, yeah. So that was where I first heard that and learned that phrase. But this brings into question then just movement in general. We're taking that more and more away from children too, right, when we expect, we're focused on didactic teaching and drilling and memorization. Where's the opportunity to do all the movement that we have all this brain development now to tell us that is, crucial to how our brains develop and grow and how we do the under the surface things that we're going to need for the self-regulation and
in fact, there was a recent study that showed that time outside, particularly unstructured time outside, not time outside where you have to play Red Rover,
yeah,
but you can actually, and of course, if you left it up to me, it would be time outside where you actually get to be in nature and not on a concrete playground set of equipment. That time outside was linked to much better gains in self-regulation. And the authors made the point that in part you regulate yourself running around outside and doing things and learning to concentrate and stick with something and then move on to something else.
Right.
And you also bump up against other children and you learn to sort of have to work as part of the group instead of by yourself. And even though these children are with 19 other children, there are 20 children in a classroom, they're all treated as individuals. There's very little time from our data. We see there's very little time where the children are actually in associative interactions.
Right.
They're either alone or they're in this group where they're supposed to sit by themselves and pretend the other children aren't there.
Right. Don't touch, don't talk, don't.
Exactly. Crisscross applesauce.
Yes. Oh, brother. Crisscross applesauce. That's something people hold tight to, right? They do not want you to say that's not the best way to expect children to participate in your group. It's so ingrained in what we're doing.
I'll have to be positive.
Yeah.
I was in one classroom in rural Tennessee some time ago, and it was center time. And it was a very good center time. And often there are huge transitions between things. And the more transitions there are, the lengthier the transitions between activities, and the more of them there are, the more negative and behavior control you see.
Oh, sure.
A part of teachers. It makes sense. So these children got from the end of centers to whole group book reading in a blink of an eye. I couldn't even exactly see how they did it. And I was like, what? Wait a minute, what happened? And part of it was they didn't have to sit on a number. They were all clumped up together. They were very interested in what book she was going to read. And they were all sort of leaning against each other and getting close and trying to, and it was such a warm, positive group experience that they were very happy to leave centers and come do that. And hardly had a transition at all. It was wonderful.
I love that image. That's very much the way I would do story time. Is they can sit where they want. They can be on their tummies. They can lay on their back if they need to. They can sit by their friend, however that works. But I had one little boy. It was a group of 4 and 5-year-olds, and he was like, "So-and-so's too close to me. So-and-so's too close to me." And I said, "Well, you could move." And he went, "What?" It's like, I didn't know I could, he was just so sort of used to being told, stay in your spot and don't move
Yeah.
when we're doing stories, that was so foreign. Um, what else? I feel like we've covered a lot. I've really enjoyed listening to you talk, but is there anything you would add as like a parting idea or
Um, the National wait a minute, Council of State Legislators actually has has endorsed a new report that's international.
Mhm.
And their endorsement, which just came out a couple of months ago, now these are state legislators,
Yeah.
said the heading was "The Time Is Now." And they were talking about it's time to rethink American education, to reimagine what we're doing because it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of uh, press behind getting change that I'd love to see. I don't know what will happen, if anything, from that,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
thought, isn't that marvelous if there are, if a national council of state legislators is going to say and that's nationwide, we
Mm-hmm.
need to address these issues that our system, the way we're doing education right now for children is not working well for them.
Right.
And they looked at international comparisons and said, tried to adopt, well, the report anyway tries to recommend things that are much more like you and I would be interested in from Nordic countries. And
Mm-hmm.
so maybe, but my problem, I don't want to leave on such a negative note. My concern is we may be sacrificing a lot of children while we learn that we've got it
While
wrong.
we figure it out. Yeah, I think that's true. Um, but there's hopeful spots everywhere. There's good stories and people who are willing to be fierce advocates, to be on the side of the child and their families. So I have to think. I have a coffee mug that says idealist, like it's just a giant mug, and I get teased about it a lot. It's like I have to be like, right? I'm not gonna say
Well,
that we can't
I
fix or change anything. I have to be
I
this
just
idealist.
don't, oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I
go
don't
ahead.
understand the fierce pre-K advocates who can't turn their fierce determination over toward fixing our early childhood care system.
Right.
I don't know why we continue to have opposition
Mm-hmm.
to quote childcare,
Right.
and saying things like families raise children, that's, this is socialist to have childcare.
Yeah.
And yet we're willing to put all this money into expanding the public school system, for
Yeah.
into pre-K.
Yeah.
It seems schizophrenic to me. I
Right.
mean,
Right. I think a lot of it is teacher ego and their need to be identified as a teacher and not recognizing you could still be a teacher. It just looks different,
exactly.
That's a whole other episode too.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. This was really great. And I know folks are gonna enjoy having you on the show for this episode. So
Well, it was
thank you.
really fun. I like talking to you. Thank you so much for asking me.
Come back anytime.
Okay.
Whenever you've got something you want to get out, talk about,
Okay.
you just let me know.
That's a deal.
All right. Thank you, Dale. And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.